Hello and welcome back to another episode. Now today I want to share with you one of my great loves, and that is the character of Tintin by the cartoonist Hergé. Now my journey with Tintin didn't get off to the best of starts. My introduction to Tintin came with this book, The Adventures of Tintin, Flight 714. This particular book I won at a raffle, a school raffle, when I was 7 years old. And we're out in the field just outside school, and my name was called, having won this stuff, or my number was called, and it wasn't just the book. I also won what I thought was a Rubik's Cube, this sort of blocky thing that looked a bit like a puzzle, and I was like, oh, what is this? So brandishing the book and the Rubik's Cube, I went away to investigate. I found myself a quiet corner in the field, and while everyone else was running around, you know, throwing balls, riding donkeys, having fun, I was trying to figure out, what is this thing? Pushing it and pressing it and trying to turn it, and eventually I found something that you could push, and I pushed, and it wasn't a Rubik's Cube, it was actually a designer bottle of perfume, and I pushed the button, blinded myself, ran around the field like a mad thing, almost fell into the pond, and apparently I groped my head teacher at the time as well. Finally someone figured out what was happening and took me to have my eyes washed out in the boys' toilets. But thankfully, when I got back to the field, sore eyes, red, and all sort of slightly blind like a newborn puppy, the book was still waiting for me on the floor. And Flight 714 is a strange story. It's a story of adventure in the sort of in around the Polynesian kind of part of the world, where a nefarious character called Rastapopoulos, who looks a little bit like a cross between an oil tycoon and a movie producer, has a plan to hold a particular wealthy businessman hostage on an island. And it turns out that this island isn't just an abandoned, in the middle of nowhere kind of place with potentially sort of old Japanese prisons in it from the Second World War. It's actually the seat on Earth of an alien race. And this alien race, supposedly, at the end of the book, has dealings with the people on the island, and it gets a little bit trippy. I'm not going to spoil the story, just because it is worth reading, but what I will say is that this book had me enthralled. The art style is so clear and clean and crisp, and this is something which Hergé was praised for throughout his career, was a way of drawing which was charismatic, which was dynamic, and yet at no point was it blurry or was it difficult to see what was going on. Everything, every line, every colour is immaculate. It's also incredibly well researched. Hergé was famous for not only coming up with fascinating stories, intriguing plots, but also for researching locations and technology and the way that, say for example, a boat is put together. There are boats that appear in towards the beginning of this story when the plane is being hijacked, or when a plane is being hijacked, which again they're meticulously drawn. The plane actually itself is meticulously drawn. Hergé was a person who travelled very much in his imagination, and he wanted every detail to be pristine and perfect. But it's not just that stuff which I like. It's not just the artwork, it's the sense of humour, it's the sense of fun, it's the sense of adventure. And for people around the world, especially here in Europe, Tintin represents an incredibly pure and open and fun sense of adventure. The kind of adventure that you could have, it seems, in the early 20th century. You buy a plane ticket and you find yourself in Shanghai, or maybe you hop on a boat and go across the Atlantic, and on the way there your boat is sunk and you're on a raft surrounded by sharks. It's one of these sort of Saturday morning serial type adventures, and in that sense it's not unlike Indiana Jones. In fact, actually, Indiana Jones, when it was first reviewed in France, when Raiders of the Lost Ark was receiving reviews in the press, they would compare it directly to Tintin, and this is actually one of the reasons why Steven Spielberg ended up making the movie of Tintin recently, or a movie. There's been several live action ones which I wouldn't recommend, but making the animated movie is because actually he came across Tintin in reviews of Indiana Jones. He came across initially what he thought was just a weird phrase, Tintin. He thought it was sort of a phrase describing the type of film it was, but no, it's the name of a character. Now, the meticulous research extended to, for example, books like this, Tintin Destination Moon, and also there's a follow-up where they're actually on the moon. But the research that went into, for example, what would go into a space program and this kind of thing was, as I say, meticulous. And this book came out in 1953. So 16 years before the US space program landed on the moon, Hergé was imagining, probably based on the writings of people like Jules Verne and this kind of thing, imagining what it might be like to go to the moon. So the adventures are big and grand. There's no small little things in the Tintin stories, but he deals with plots which are very topical. Very rarely does an Hergé book or does a Tintin book not have something to say about the part of the world that it's visiting. Sometimes it's a bit of a criticism, say for example of American gangster culture. Sometimes it's something about political intrigue following the Second World War, maybe in the middle of Europe. There's a story in particular where that involves intrigue to do with the royal family. Some of the books are more light-hearted. There's a very strange one when people are talking about I think a meteorite, and it's all about it's sort of the sensation that people get when there's talk of war in the air, and he portrays this by having this bizarre, very trippy adventure for Tintin, where a meteorite causes first of all things like car tires to melt, and this kind of gets really hot. But then when he goes investigates the meteor that's landed in the ocean, this giant mushroom grows on it. It's kind of weird, but but for the most part, every single Tintin story had a sort of a feeling or a message behind it, and for the most part, what they represent is a very positive view of humanity, and I think that's possibly why Hergé is so much loved. That said, though, he has been the subject of accusations of racism. For example, his portrayal of natives in Africa in, I think it's called Tintin in the Congo. I'm not sure it's actually listed as one of the main books there is actually a series list on the back of most of the books, you see. I think Tintin in the Congo was a sort of a pre-main Tintin book. It was a sort of an experiment. He has certainly got a tendency, or had a tendency, to draw, for example, African people in a slightly what we would call gollywog kind of way. Very black skin, big fat lips, this kind of thing. But we've got to remember that Hergé was very much a product of his time and place. He was brought up in Belgium, very much middle class, slightly right-wing leaning in that sense. But as far as we can tell, he wasn't a particularly racist person, and he didn't actually have necessarily this sense that Africa needed to be subdued or guided by the Europeans. As far as we're publicly aware, perhaps there were some private political tendencies, but for the most part, what he represents is a very optimistic view of the world, and a view of the world as being full of potential adventures. Everything from going underwater to investigate Red Rackham's treasure to being prisoners of the sun with the sort of like a Mesoamerican culture holding them hostage, going to the moon, having a fascinating character such as Professor Calculus, who is incredibly forgetful and very deaf, so he's constantly mishearing what people are saying, much to the frustration of those around him. And of course, how could I not yet have mentioned the amazing Captain Haddock. Captain Haddock is by far my favourite Tintin character. For those of you who've made it this far in the video, I'm sure you're amazed I haven't mentioned Captain Haddock sooner. But he comes out with all sorts of wonderful exclamations, such as 10,000 thundering typhoons, blue blistering barnacles, and all this kind of thing. Essentially, that's, instead of swearing, he just loses his cool in very colourful ways. That's part of his charm. And if you've seen the animated film, or for example, actually the serials, because actually all of the books were put into DVDs, and I bought this set many years ago, but I used to watch it every Saturday morning. Tintin was always on. When it was on TV, that is, I'd find it and I'd put it on, because I loved Captain Haddock, I loved Tintin, I loved Professor Calculus, I loved the world that they were exploring. It was just so important and so crucial to my own sense of adventure. And in some ways, I might not have personally, or rather say professionally, become an archaeologist as I am, were it not for Tintin. And in particular, actually, oddly enough, Flight 714, even though it's got a slightly bizarre and twisted view of an ancient culture, mixing and interacting with aliens, it sort of got me into that sense of adventure. Other great ones include The Crab with the Golden Claws. That's a wonderful one. It's got a bit of like a film noir kind of feel to it. There's some investigations going on at the beginning, and then also Cigars of the Pharaoh. Now, this one, Cigars of the Pharaoh, is an odd one. It was published in English after it was in French, and actually after the character of Rastapopoulos had already turned up in other books in English. So at the beginning of Cigars of the Pharaoh, there's a scene when Tintin bumps into Rastapopoulos, and in French he says that's not just some passerby, but in English he says, we have met before, because he had met before, namely in Flight 714, for example. So little tidbit for you Tintin fans out there, Cigars of the Pharaoh it's got quite a significantly different opening in terms of the feeling of it, because in the French version he doesn't fully know who Rastapopoulos is, but in the English version he's ready for him. So there you go, Tintin, and of course everything that surrounds him is one of my favourite storytelling characters, mediums, both in the cartoon, in the comic, in the film, in the world. It's one of my favourite ones ever. But there are two final things I'd like to say. First of all, the character of Snowy, or Milou, as he is called in the original French. Milou, or Snowy, is such an adorable dog. He's just lovely, but he's also incredibly witty. In the comics, he's given little moments where he'll be well aware of what's happening in a particular moment, and everyone around him is just a bit oblivious to what's going on, because Snowy has insight. You actually get to see what he's thinking in the comics. I love it, absolutely love it. That you get Snowy's inner thoughts, the clever dog, the star of the show for many. And the final thing I'd like to talk about very, very quickly is this panel here in Flight 714. There's a particular part of one page. This image just here freaked me out as a child, and it freaked me out because, even though it's obvious to see it now as an adult, you can see what's happening. There's a man pulling a plaster off another man's face. As a child, I didn't understand it. For some reason, this particular picture, everything else in this book made perfect sense. I knew exactly what was going on. But that one image, it looked like he was sort of pulling his skin off his face, to me and to my imagination. So it freaked me out. So every time I got to that point of the story, and I read this book countless times, but every time I got to that point in the story, I'd find myself going, just sort of, don't understand, I'll just skip to the next panel and keep on from there. Of course, he goes from having plasters over his face to not. I should have been able to figure out what was going on, but for some reason, just that image just haunted me. It's kind of hard to explain, you know, but it really did. It just, it kind of still, I can see why it scared me now, actually. It's sort of freaky to look at it. Anyway, guys, if you haven't heard of Tintin, do go and look for some of his books. There was some brilliant examples out there. He's now been reprinted in more recently, so you can actually get editions for not all that much money. Obviously the original editions cost quite a lot, and that's why I haven't got many of them. But also as well, if you want, just get the DVD set. It's not as good as the books, but it's almost there. And actually Hergé himself makes an appearance in all the cartoons, or in many of them. He'll turn up as a background character. They've drawn him in his own style. But yeah, definitely take a look. Tintin is worth a look. It's just so much fun. If you like film noir, if you like adventure, if you like larger-than-life characters and plots that span the globe, Tintin is for you. So definitely check it out. Anyway, I've talked enough on this. As ever guys, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.